Thank you for joining me. I'm Casper, and welcome to the presentation about the mental control of the energy fields of the body. I'm not sure how I'm going to title this one, but it is about the energy fields of the body. It's about life force and it flowing through you and being obstructed, and how the body is an energetic field that has energetic wheels, vortices in it, and they need to be flowing and moving, and that's how we get our health. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit. The energy fields of the body. I'm going to use the help of Manly P. Hall and Carolyn Myss today. Um, at first, we're going to be discussing Manly P. Hall's lecture on the magnetic energy fields of the body, because Hall understood that the theory of magnetism had a huge bearing on the practice of therapy. He predicted, now he's from he did a lot in like the 1950s and 60s. I think he was still lecturing in the 70s and maybe 80s, but he died in 1990. So he is kind of from another era, and that is obvious in the language of his writing. But it's still one of the best. I love it and can't get enough of it. But then when we bring in Carolyn Myss later, she's more of the modern take on that. But now, back in Manly P. Hall's day, he predicted that conventional medicine was kind of doomed to end up in a dead end because of their materialistic view on things. He said that we will not be able to negate the investigation of those unseen forces around us, which, though unseen, have a continuing effect on our lives. Now, the late Manly P. Hall is one of my favorite authors and philosophers. His recorded lectures are like helpful hieroglyphs. They're like ancient wisdom that got left behind, and then you find it all dusty in the corner. So, using some excerpts from his lecture entitled Mental Control of the Energy Fields of the Body, we're going to look into magnetism and how the energetic vortices of the human body constitute a living diagnosis at all times. We'll also discuss the anatomy of the spirit with the help of Dr. Carolyn Myss, and we'll explore magnetism using her language so that our modern minds can better grasp what Manly P. Hall was conveying. And we will also look at the relationship between life choices, personal power, and health. Hall said it's not going to be possible to continue to lock from our consideration those parts of man's constitution which are real though invisible. There exists a mutual influence between the heavenly bodies, the earth, and living bodies. A fluid universally diffused and continuous, though as to admit no vacuum, and which from its nature is capable of receiving, propagating, and communicating all of the impressions of motion, is the medium of this influence. A person in whom the magnetic field was strong and was normally sustained apparently had greater resistance against the danger of infection. Anything that exists does possess magnetism as a means not only of its existence, but of its animation. Manly P. Hall also said that the corruption of flesh is a magnetic process. And he's talking about the fluctuations of the energy, the magnetism of the flow of life force energy. And from these kinds of observations, Hall concludes that we have here the basis for morality. If any attitude results in an unfortunate mutation in the magnetic field, that attitude must be wrong so far as man is concerned. Any thought or emotion which is harmful to his energy resources must be contrary to the intentions of the law by which he is controlled or directed, for all such negative mutations must contribute ultimately to sickness and possibly ultimate death. So basically, Manly P. Hall is saying that man's energies can be influenced by his conduct, and that it's conceivable that ideas have magnetic fields, and that there is a relationship, an exact and specific relationship between the various aspects of man's consciousness and the afflictions which burden his flesh. Now, magnetism becomes a kind of conscience, a censorship upon all action, and for those who keep its rules by obeying the principles of the powers which move and direct energy, it becomes a kindly and helpful friend, a source of life and sustenance. But if it is outraged, it turns upon the person who breaks its rules, not because it does not like them, but because they have set up obstructions to energy. One of my favorite quotes by Manly P. Hall is that therapy begins with tranquility. In Hall's words, this energy, if given all possible and reasonable support by man, will do its work better, more quickly than it can accomplish this work if it must at the same time fight against a group of negative reactions. Thus, therapy begins with tranquility. It begins with the gradual development of this consciousness of hope, faith, and love, by means of which the person achieves a rapport with life itself. And this life, thus coming in without interference or interruption, without being wasted or lost through excessive expenditures that are meaningless, this life accomplishes its perfect works. And it was one of the beliefs of the ancient magnetists that God and nature intended man to be well. Sickness is not any more a natural state of man than war is a natural state of nations, or crime a natural state of society. Sickness is the result of man being unable as yet to perfectly understand the rules governing health, or in one way or another, for selfish or unselfish reasons, violating those rules. Salvation for all things lies in non-interference. Manly P. Hall states that we have not learned to have strong constructive beliefs in terms of health. And he attributes this to, in his words, having lost much of our religious anchorage and having no firm ethical structure to take its place or even help compensate for its loss. We find it quite conceivable that the general lowering of the level of simple faith in good, faith in right, faith in truth, faith in God, that the losses in these forms of faith might very well result in a general dilemma relating to magnetism. And just to bring it back to a dilemma relating to life force, or as I sometimes refer to it, life force suppression being in our systems. Manly P. Hall says, we may also assume that a collective magnetism where millions of persons holding certain negative attitudes create a common dilemma. It might go so far as to affect adversely the magnetic field of the planet. Something is wrong that cannot be corrected by efficiency, kindness, cheerfulness, or anything that we know. There seems to be an antagonism on the level of the magnetic field, which kind of upholds my point with there being a mass psychosis of armoring and it affecting everybody. Hall continues, now the problem of indifference also plays a part in our magnetic theory. Energy moves with interest. It moves with concern. It moves with all kinds of active attitudes. It does not move, however, from indifference. Indifference is the ultimate degree of detachment. It means that there is no sympathy, no relationship, no common ground. It does not necessarily stand for an antagonism in the magnetic fields, but it very often prevents any interest or direction of energy by means of which an acquaintance or an association can be improved. And let me just bring those words, acquaintance and association, like that doesn't have to be a person that you're having a better relationship with. It can be a concept of life, an ideology, a belief. Rather than indifference, there must be a strong but perhaps rather impersonal sense of values. Again, this term is a little dangerous, for the impersonal individual may be without sympathies, and sympathy is the principle upon which magnetism moves. Oh, that's so huge. I'll read it again. Sympathy is the principle upon which magnetism moves. Therefore, detachment must not and should not be unsympathetic. It becomes therefore necessary to refine and regulate values to the end that we hold the proper attitudes toward ourselves and to all other creatures. That this attitude cannot be assumed merely by an action of the will or a determination of the mind is also evident. The attitude must become a total part of the life itself. The attitude must arise in consciousness and be communicated therefrom directly into the fields of energy which support the body. Researches by Mesmer and others have shown beyond doubt that the magnetic field to operate best must be in a state of tranquility. Tranquility simply means now normalcy, nothing more or less. Excitation or the tremendous upsurge of intensity is not normalcy. Depression or the reduction of energy to the state perhaps of inertia is not normal. And one of the forces or circumstances which causes the greatest havoc in man's magnetic structure is uncontrolled and extensive emotional outbursts. These cannot do any good on any plane, and on the psychic plane, they do much harm. They really do. The health of the individual can be very often greatly changed or helped by his own ability to direct energy. So here we are entering like, well, what do I do with this information? Wherever magnetism is blocked, there is either a derangement or there has been a fatigue, which has resulted in a process of crystallization, also known as immobilization. This process of crystallization inhibits the continuance of magnetism even after the fatigue has passed. This means that to meet this kind of a situation, special pressures or concentrations of magnetism may be necessary. As many obstructions in their earlier states are not attended by much noticeable pain, that type of warning which we find in connection with the outer surface of the body, like wounds, scars, boils, things of that type of warning is not available. There is, however, always some kind of warning, and the most common warnings are failures of processes, such as digestion and assimilation, minor disturbances of the heart, a sense of tension, nervousness, stress, the gradual loss of the use of a member or part, or the failure of its function in the general biological economy. So he's using the word magnetist a lot, and this is kind of like a Reiki healer in that a magnetist could loosen up the flow of energy and give their patient the use of their own energy once again. Shoot. Sorry about that. My phone was about to die. I didn't realize my battery was so low. So I was talking about how the Reiki practitioner is similar to the magnetist in that a patient comes to them with, various sensations that come from obstructions of energy. So the Reiki healer, and the magnetist would relieve the obstruction of the energy flow in the body. And that would usually return a significant amount of the person's natural life force energy to be available to them. That, here's where it comes into being responsible for your own health, for creating your own health. The magnetist can loosen up the flow of energy, but even then, the patient has to take on the responsibility and authority for their health. And this includes being conscious and responsible with attitudes and checking the attitudes for destructive influences, energetically speaking, checking yourself for, like the example of tightly holding on to not forgiving someone. Manly P. Hall continues. If it is held as a fact in consciousness, it will affect the availability of magnetism. For the magnetic field will accept the pattern and move to fulfill it. Just in the same way, if a person inwardly experiences by a suspended but purposeful effort the tranquility of his own consciousness, if he will visualize himself as in a state of adjustment with life, he will find it easier and easier to obtain this state in his outward experience. Thus, visualization means to see things as they should be. By the proper direction of energy through attitude, particularly through these attitudes recommended by Paul, faith, hope, and love, man living in these moods, in these ways, and achieving a certain tranquility in his own nature, will find that his energy is greater and that when emergency arises, his recuperation is more rapid, and that he is less likely to infections and the corruptions of the flesh, and also less likely to create those emotional and mental situations which still require more expenditure of energy to mend or correct. Now, if you like that take on energy fields, I think you will love the way Carolyn Myss illustrates the energy fields in her wonderful book, Anatomy of the Spirit. Every attitude we hold is a source of positive or negative power for which we are accountable. Okay, continuing. Healing does not always mean that the physical body recovers from an illness. Healing can also mean that one's spirit has released long-held fears and negative thoughts toward oneself or others. Before the body produces a physical illness, energy indicators such as prolonged lethargy and depression tell us that we're losing our vitality. Treatment in the energy field can include an array of therapies like counseling, acupuncture, massage, Reiki healing, but the essential ingredient for healing energy remains the active involvement of the patient. Life choices express our spirit and affect our health. Illnesses develop as a consequence of behavioral patterns and attitudes that we do not realize are biologically toxic. Oh, and there was an excerpt I wanted to read at this point. Okay. We all have negative feelings, but not all negativity produces disease. To create disease, negative emotions have to be dominant, and what accelerates the process is knowing the negative thought to be toxic, but giving it permission to thrive in your consciousness anyway. For instance, you may know you need to forgive someone, yet you decide that remaining angry gives you more power. Remaining obsessively angry makes you more likely to develop a disease because the energy consequence of a negative obsession is powerlessness. Energy is power, and transmitting energy into the past by dwelling on painful events drains power from your present-day body and can lead to illness. Power is essential for healing and for maintaining health. Attitudes that generate a feeling of powerlessness not only lead to low self-esteem, but also deplete the physical body of energy and weaken overall health. The human energy system is an expression of personal power. Our cell tissues hold the vibrational patterns of our attitudes, our belief systems, and the presence or absence of an exquisite energy frequency or grace that we can activate by calling back our spirits from negative attachments. So, fear can be a strong attachment. The refusal to forgive someone can be a strong attachment. These strong negative attachments that hold power over us, they're basically like false gods. Carolyn Myss says, if we tell a lie, our energy field will often communicate to the other person the energy fact that we are not telling the truth. Truth continually pulsates within us, directing us to live according to the right use of its power. What drains your body and what fuels your body, let me say that again. What drains your spirit drains your body, and what fuels your spirit fuels your body. Faith, hope, and love fuel the body and the spirit. I hope that I have been able to encourage some listeners to pursue those energy signatures in their thoughts and attitudes because they are biologically vital to your health. Thank you for watching.